The Jets continue to work around the margins, and this time they have re-signed Ville Heinola to a 2-year deal. Find out all of the details on tonight's episode of Locked On Winnipeg Jets.
You're Locked On the Hockey Jets, your daily podcast on the Winnipeg Jets, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Hey friends, and welcome to tonight's episode of Locked On Winnipeg Jets, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. I'm your host, Harrison Lee, an avid Winnipeg Jets fan and an online blogger. You can follow me on Twitter at HLivingLoco and at LO_Winnipeg Jets. Thanks for making Locked On Jets your first listen of the day every day. If you like what you're hearing, be sure to like, follow, and subscribe on all of your favorite podcasting platforms and YouTube. Doing so, of course, is always free of charge and ensures you never miss another episode. Most of all, though, of course, we just love and appreciate your support. Tonight's episode, obviously, it is still relatively quiet in Winnipeg Jets land, but that said, Winnipeg is still making some moves here and there. You know, they're not going to sit quietly and do nothing this offseason, even if perhaps our definitions of doing something are a little bit on the quieter side. So, for Winnipeg, obviously, they still have some contracts to sort out, and one of the bigger ones that was outstanding was Ville Heinola. And I know that sounds a little bit silly, but Heinola is somebody that I think continues to still have, despite maybe a bit of a reduced ceiling, somebody who I still believe is an important future player for the Jets and a guy that I don't really want to just overlook. We'll talk about his contract and what it kind of suggests about the plan for him over the next couple of seasons in just a moment. Before we go any further, though, just wanted to let you know that tonight's episode is brought to you by Indeed. Still searching for a great candidate for your company? Don't search, just match with Indeed. Start hiring now with a $75 sponsored job credit to upgrade your job post at Indeed.com/lockedon. Terms and conditions apply. Need to hire? You need Indeed. Now, like I said, the Jets are obviously making some smaller moves here and there, but re-signing Ville Heinola, I think, was not necessarily a how do I describe this? It was a priority for this offseason, but it wasn't perhaps at the absolute top of Winnipeg's list. Now, all that said, I don't think it's a move that you can just dismiss either. It's not like the Jets are bringing him back just to be roster depth. I think Heinola this year is genuinely expecting to play, and it might be why he took a relatively cheap 2-year deal. He's got an $800K 2-year contract, which is very interesting. I saw some folks asking why this might be the case. And I think for Heinola, right, obviously there's been talk about him over the years maybe having a change of scenery, but let's be honest, right, he hasn't really played a lot of NHL games, and it was only recently where people started to think about him as perhaps really earning a spot. So if he were to leave Winnipeg, he might go to a place where it'd be hard for him to get NHL ice time. And with the Jets, there's, to me, a fairly clear role for him with Winnipeg's present and future. And so, doing this 2-year deal gives him some guaranteed money, perhaps even through a potential injury for 2 years, right? And I feel like that's perhaps not something to overlook. That salary is pretty legit. It's important. And especially for Heinola, who's going to be fighting for a spot, this could be the best way for him to try and cement his role and eventually earn a bigger raise, right? At the end of this, maybe he gets a couple of years at like $3 million or something. Should he really do well? I don't know what his performance is going to be like and what he'll earn, but perhaps, he gets himself a nice raise. Obviously, Sandberg is in line for a reasonable raise here in a couple of bits. I think he could be signing a DeBelloy sort of deal. One of your top overall defenders on the team, a young prime-aged defender as well, who's certainly really locked down Winnipeg's left side. So for the Jets, finding a guy who can be both a quality puck-moving blue liner on the left and on the right side, depending on which version you want from Heinola, it is basically found money. $800K for 2 years is bargain price. And it is a very interesting show me kind of deal. And I think Heinola is one of those guys that I continue to believe still has something to offer this team. I think he'll have a prime role under Arniel. I think that he'll be asked to play pretty significant minutes. And if he does really well and really proves that he is the guy, maybe he gets a nice hefty raise at the end of all of this, which would be nice because he's had to wait his turn for a very long time, perhaps a little bit too long, in my opinion, based on some of the guys who have played ahead of him. But better late than never, I guess. And with Arniel very much embracing a youth forward future, I think that there is very clearly a spot on this team for Ville, especially with where the Jets' blue line is. Winnipeg's defense isn't exactly sexy. It definitely lacks mobility, and that's where Heinola, I think, is going to be a really big asset. And everyone always says he's small and all this stuff, but for the Jets, size is usually a hindrance. Winnipeg, for one thing, is actually ranked within the top half of the league in terms of height and size. Where they tend to not do that well is in speed. So anything that helps them get faster and more skilled, I think, is something that they should investigate. There is a version of size that is helpful, but like I've said in the past, if it comes at the expense of skating, skill, speed, you just don't really want to sacrifice too much because you want to hit your opponents, right? Or block shots or something. Winnipeg, in many of the games where they've generally been out hit, they've actually won more of those games more often. If you're getting hit a lot, it does tend to indicate that you're actually carrying the puck more than your opponent. If your opponent has to keep doing that, it means that they have no possession, because it's not like you can just check people routinely without the puck. So I think for Winnipeg, it is important to kind of get these sorts of deals nailed down. Obviously, Heinola, I think we're still waiting to see what exactly he becomes for this team, but I've always been a big believer in him. I continue to believe that he has a future with this team, and I think the Jets do agree. I think Winnipeg certainly foresees a role with this squad. I think that they're going to give it to him this season, and I think preseason will be a very interesting test to see what his ankle is like and to see him potentially win a spot out of camp. He'll be honestly having some reasonable competition. He'll have to fend off Logan Stanley, maybe even Elias Salamonson, although Salamonson is probably more on the right side. I think Heinola probably has a pretty good claim to the left spot on that third pairing, but maybe something changes. So for the Jets, their defense, if they can figure out a way to sort of minimize Pion's impact, I would say they do have a fairly legit unit. It's not going to be like the world's top defense, but relatively speaking, for what Winnipeg is paying, this could be a really good, relatively solid group at a fairly bargain price, which, if that's the case and that's what happens, I do hope that they take advantage of it and swing big at the trade deadline. I still wonder, this upcoming year, if maybe they take a swing on a big expiring free agent, maybe an RFA or something. They do kind of have the world at their oyster, and the world is their oyster, and obviously they've still got Rucker McGroarty to sort out. So maybe McGroarty becomes a piece of the puzzle in a deal that brings back a really big roster player to help Winnipeg's forward group improve. And I know we had some interesting fans from Habs fans, or interesting comments from Habs fans recently about Rucker, having low value, and perhaps he does have some questionable value compared to where it was at draft, but I'll tell you this. Teams don't look at players and say that they're not trading for them just because they've never played an NHL game. That's not how prospect works, and that's not how the valuation works. And I think folks know that. I think they're being a little bit disingenuous about that. Do I think it's true that he still probably shouldn't be trying to demand his own roster spot already without having had a lot of NHL experience? Perhaps. I think that was a little more forward than he should have been. But in terms of his trade value, there are going to be plenty of teams that are still interested in bringing him in. So time will tell who actually wins that race and who the Jets are willing to partner with. But I suspect we're going to get that deal sometime in the next month or so. I would think that the Jets probably want to get through this before preseason starts, but maybe it does linger on into the season. I hope it doesn't. I think that's not a great situation to be in. The less time you have to sort this out, the less fun it's going to be, but we'll see, right? I think it'd be nice if Rutgers camp kind of plays ball and helps us help them get through all of this. So we'll see. But obviously, in the meantime, the Jets still do have some other deals to attend to. One of those contracts is, of course, Cole Perfetti. And we just saw a potentially comparable Cole Perfetti-ish deal get signed by the LA Kings. Thank you, Rob Blake. We'll talk about what that contract looks like and how it could impact Winnipeg in just a little bit. Before we go too much further, though, I did want to shout out our friends and partners at Indeed. We're driven by the search for better, but when it comes to hiring, the best way to search for a candidate isn't to search at all. Don't search, match with Indeed. If you need to hire, you need Indeed. Indeed is your matching and hiring platform with over 350 million global monthly visitors and a matching engine that helps you find quality candidates fast. Just like assembling a super championship team, you've got to find the right components, and Indeed totally gets that. They want to help you ditch the busy work because Indeed will do the scheduling, screening, and messaging so you can connect with quality candidates faster. And they don't just help you hire faster, they also deliver highest quality matches per search compared to many other job sites because they know that you don't want to waste time and money. You're a busy business owner or perhaps even just a manager looking for quality talent, and that's why they want to offer you a very comprehensive package and platform that allows you to pay for the only quality candidates you receive. And with leveraging over 140 million qualifications and preferences every day, Indeed's matching engine is constantly learning from your preferences, so the more you use Indeed, the better it gets. Listeners of this show will also receive a special $75 sponsored job credit to get your jobs more visibility at Indeed.com/lockedon. Just go to Indeed.com/lockedon right now and support our show by saying you heard about Indeed on this Locked On Winnipeg Jets podcast. That's Indeed.com/lockedon. Terms and conditions apply. Need to hire? You need Indeed. Greetings, friends, and welcome back to this episode of Locked On Winnipeg Jets, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. Every day, thank you so much for joining us on tonight's episode as we're just chatting about some minor contract updates for the Jets. Obviously, they're still making some deals here and there, not a lot, mind you. Nothing that I think is particularly crazy or amazingly exciting, but for the Jets fans among us who really love some of our prospects like Ville Heinola, obviously this is pretty good news if you're a Jets fan. The one that we're still waiting for, though, perhaps the biggest contract of this offseason, is definitely Cole Perfetti. And Perfetti is, for a lot of reasons, a player that I really think has a big potential season upcoming, a guy that I continue to believe in as a core player for this present and future Jets team. And I suspect Arniel feels the same way. It seems like they've had conversations in the press conferences we've seen. I really feel like Arniel is reinforcing the idea of players like Cole being a huge part of this future. And so it would be nice if the Jets could really turn that relationship into something a little longer term. Now, I'll be honest, I don't think Perfetti has a lot of incentive to do this, but should he consider locking up a firmer long-term deal? We just saw Quinton Byfield sign a 5-year deal for around $6.25 million, which, given Byfield's scoring rates, his deployments and stuff, and how the Kings have used him, I actually think it's not that dissimilar to what you're going to see with Perfetti. Now, with Perfetti, what's kind of interesting is, if you look at his scoring rates and stuff, I actually think Perfetti paces reasonably better in some areas. But Byfield, I would say, has probably been, at least in terms of perception, the more notable player. But honestly, Perfetti, his scoring rates are really similar. I think his deployment and usage average is pretty similar. I do think Byfield has generally been trusted more the last few years. And it'd be nice if Perfetti is really given room to grow this upcoming season. So I think for Perfetti, where I kind of see him going is more to a 2-year bridge. I continue to think that is the most likely scenario. I think he'll kind of see what the Jets do. I think this could be a scenario where he doesn't want to quite lock it up yet. He doesn't have a huge track record necessarily, but then again, the other part of it is, he has had some injury-shortened seasons, and it is at times hard to turn away from guaranteed money. And if he does sign a 4 or a 5-year deal, it would take him right to around free agency, which means that then he'd probably get a big raise should his career continue the way that a lot of us do believe it's going. So for Perfetti, it's an interesting gamble, right? Do you try and bet on yourself for the next 2 years, or do you lock it in and become a core player? And then once you hit around the free agency moment, then you go for a big slam dunk contract. I think that there's merit to both sides. I think for the Jets, the best scenario is he signs for 4 or 5 years. You get him for around maybe 5.5 to 6 million, and it allows him to make pretty good money while also leaving room for a significant raise should things go really well over the next few seasons. And for Perfetti, I mean, he is a guy that I think is going to be very clearly in Winnipeg's top six for many years to come. I have really raved about his skill and overall impact, and with some real signs of growth in his offensive game towards the end of last season, I continue to think that he is kind of a sleeping beast waiting in the wings. For a guy who only played like 13 and a half minutes last season, he did have like 38 points in 71 games. I think his role will continue to grow. I think he has a lot left to offer the Jets. And for the last couple of seasons, right, like he even paced a better scoring record in the year prior. So I got to be honest. I think if there's a way to get him signed at a reasonable contract length for a reasonable cap hit, I would probably do it. I think this coming season could be a really big breakout year for him. You really kind of have to play the projection game with his skill because it very easily is projectable. I think he could get close, maybe even reach 50 points if he gets around second line minutes. It wouldn't shock me if he does. And if the Jets can get that at like $6 million for a season, that is pretty dang good value. And for Perfetti, you really entrench yourself on this team. You continue to prove your value to the Jets. And look, Winnipeg does often pay guys a reasonable amount. Maybe they don't have some of the resources and wage bills and salary structures that other teams do, but I think the Jets have done a pretty decent job compensating players. Heck, they're even giving Logan Stanley like $1.25 million for the next couple of seasons. So Perfetti, if he sticks around, if he locks it up, it'd be nice for, I think, everyone involved. I do think he'll be a fan favorite, and it'd be nice to have him committed to the Jets for the next few years while Winnipeg kind of does this transitioning thing. The Jets are definitely turning the roster over in some spots, and I think for Perfetti, this is like a perfect chance to really get maybe even up to the first line at some point. I still think that the second line probably makes the most sense, but we'll see, right? Preseason is coming up in a handful of weeks. We're not that far actually from the start of next season. I know it sounds like a lot, but August, September, then October. We're already halfway through July, so really a little over 2.5 months, and then we're back to the season, which honestly I'm kind of looking forward to it. I'll be honest. I think I'm ready for the return of Jets hockey. We've been without it for a while, and based on the direction that the team seemingly wants to go, I would be supportive of seeing this team do some fun stuff. There's some really intriguing prospects that they've picked up recently. I think there's a lot of talent in their ranks already. And if the ELCs come in and really smoke it during preseason and camp, I think you should be looking forward to next season. One of those guys that I'm kind of quietly keeping an eye on is Chaz Lucius. Lucius really hasn't had much of a pro career to speak of yet. You see flashes, but of course injuries have really derailed it. And so, if you get him also competing for a spot and perhaps even earning it this upcoming year, that would be really cool. I think he'll probably go to the Moose first if he's healthy enough, but it would be nice if he's able to actually put together a relatively full pro season. I feel bad for him. He's had some really unfortunate luck, and I think things have kind of gotten away from him at times. But in the flashes where you see his skill really take over, I don't know, man. I'm really rooting for him. I hope this is the year. I really hope that, kind of like Perfetti, Lucius also has a breakout year at some level of pro hockey. Doesn't have to be the Jets. Certainly has to be the Moose, if nothing else. But for Winnipeg, it's a fun time, and I think the Jets continue to, slowly build out some major pieces of this roster at relatively bargain prices, which gives them room to do other stuff. What that other stuff is, well, I don't know. We'll have to wait and see on that one. And this is kind of part of the conversation I sort of want to wrap up with, is if the Jets are actually going to make any like trades or free agent acquisitions. We still have some real roster flexibility and potential to bring in a big contract of a sort, maybe somebody who has yet to sign their extension with a team, or maybe the Jets dip in free agency and try and bring in a Daniel Sprong or something. I don't know. We'll talk about what seems kind of likely-ish over the next few weeks and months, but obviously, the Jets right now at least are quiet. So interesting time to be alive if you're a Jets fan. We still have to figure out what exactly Winnipeg is doing with the Rucker McGroarty situation, but they're going to play that one close to the vest, and I imagine we're not going to hear much until the deal is just about to break. So we'll talk about the next few weeks and months in just a little bit. But before we go too much further, just want to let you know, for all of you Fox Sports or ESPN watchers, if you find yourselves having to turn down the volume because there's too much shouting, you should make the switch to Locked On Sports today, a free 24/7 sports streaming channel programmed for you daily to bring you the biggest stories without all the screaming. Locked On Sports Today brings you can't-miss analysis, opinions, and news streaming daily on YouTube or the free Amazon Fire TV channels app, all part of the Locked On Sports Network. Your team every day. Now, like I said, welcome back to tonight's episode of Locked On Winnipeg Jets. Thanks so much for making us, of course, your first listen of the day. Just wanted to welcome you back as we're just chatting about, an off-season, I guess, that's been punctuated by relative quiet. I wouldn't say silence, but relative quiet. For Winnipeg, I think one of the biggest things to figure out is, you have space, you have some room to maneuver, and you've got relative clarity on contract situations with most of your free agents who were departing. You've perhaps let a few players go. Maybe you're going to sign a few guys back to the Moose or something. But for the Jets, right, like they kind of don't really have much in the way of a reputation for signing big free agents. And I think that tends to favor the Jets because you don't want to run into a situation where you get tied up in a lot of money. But there's a couple of guys who really haven't signed anything. And it has been relatively quiet for one reason or another. And I continue to really feel like that Daniel Sprong signing is just sitting there for the Jets if they're willing to do it. Sprong fills like a really big niche for me. That's kind of elite finishing of a sort in really limited minutes. And I think for where Winnipeg's roster is and what their biggest issue at 5v5 was over the past couple of years, Sprong just seems like a really good bet. I don't think he's perfect. I think he's got some parts of his game where you're kind of like, there could be some room for improvement, but he's relatively capable of keeping up. He definitely scores like a ridiculous amount despite playing less than Cole Perfetti. And if you're looking for pure finishing talent, I really feel like you're not going to find many better free agents who are still available and who might be willing to come to the Jets. Sprong obviously has some incentive to just stick around Detroit. The Red Wings seem to be on the up and up, relatively speaking. Now, personally, I don't think that they're that good, and I think Yzerman has kind of lost the plot a bit. But I don't make the decisions, and I don't sit there and advise players. So for me, Sprong should come to the Jets, just being biased, but I'm sure that he might be wanting to stick around Detroit. He's got some friends, I'm sure, that he's made there, and it seems like he's relatively relied upon. But for Winnipeg, I guess, some questions I continue to have are, okay, if you don't really go for free agents, are you swinging big for an RFA? Or perhaps are you going back to the well and maybe thinking about some players that you've had your eye on for a while and maybe have overlooked? Could the Jets go after a Barrett Hayton? He wasn't really linked to Winnipeg before, but he's a center. He just signed a 2-year extension, and I think if you're looking for a player who could potentially slide into Winnipeg's middle six, he makes sense. Maybe they go after a Nick Schmaltz or a Lawson Krause. Both of those guys have some contract control and certainty over the next couple of seasons. Schmaltz would actually kind of fit Winnipeg's timeline, relatively speaking. You get him for 2 more seasons, including this upcoming one. And for Utah, they could really use an injection of like a top-end talent or something, right? Their pool is okay. I do think that they've made some weird choices with some of their assets and prospects and picks that they've had. I feel like they made a lot of trades, and I don't know if they got much better. The John Marino trade I did like. I think that was a smart one. The Sergachev trade I didn't love. No disrespect to Sergachev. I think he's a pretty nice player, but I do think his injury history does kind of concern me. He's definitely not, old or anything, but at the age of 26, he's already had some pretty significant time off, and your body's not necessarily going to improve from this point. So, this team, it's solid, right? There's reasonable stuff to work with here, but if you're Utah and you're thinking about maybe swinging for a bigger talent or something, right? Maybe you bring in a Rucker McGroarty. He's going to join a fresh team. He's going to be part of a group that includes guys like Dylan Genther, which could be really exciting. Obviously, Utah being a fresh-faced franchise is going to have some natural intrigue with the fan base. I think it could be, geographically not too dissimilar from where Rutgers from, and maybe there is some kind of a fit there on both sides. Now, again, I don't quite know how much this fit would end up panning out, but if you could find a way to make it somehow work, I would be intrigued. I think for the Jets, though, I think they're probably going to look elsewhere, and Utah really hasn't been linked to Winnipeg for any moves. But, these are the kinds of things I wonder, right? Because the Jets often make deals that seemingly come out of nowhere with teams that really haven't been discussed at all, but have been quietly engaging Winnipeg in conversations. So with Utah definitely looking to make some swings and secure both the present and future, I wonder if McGroarty kind of fits into that sort of swing. But otherwise, Carolina's still out there. They're after both Ehlers and apparently McGroarty. The Habs, the Jets are apparently leveraging, I guess. The same thing that they did with the whole Dubois deal. But how much that's going to really pan out and end up in anything, I don't know. But I guess Columbus continues to be one other team that I keep an eye on. Columbus has some disgruntled prospects too. Ken Johnston, I don't think he's necessarily in that. And Ken Johnson, I don't think is in that category yet, but he has kind of had some conversations about him. I've seen in reports. David Jiricek is obviously the big one, though. That guy is definitely not happy with having been demoted and sort of worked around a bit. I think he's probably looking to, at some point, leave. And, the coaching staff has been let go, so maybe he wants to give it one more try, but if not, McGroarty makes a lot of sense for the Blue Jackets. He kind of brings a sort of Boone Jenner-y vibe to him. Probably a guy who's going to be good in the locker room, relatively speaking. And, provided he wants to stay there, he'll probably fit in like a glove. But I think the biggest question for the Jets is just finding a team that he's willing to sign with. And I guess that is the $1 million question, right? Where will he be willing to lock in an ELC with? So dicey road for the Jets, but Winnipeg definitely has the space to make a swing, and I think this is probably a good offseason to do it because you've got some real cap space, you've got lots of trade assets, and you've got some pretty good certainty for a couple of players who can contribute in the present and the future, and you've got their cap hits understood and mapped out for at least 1 or 2 more years. So, hey, take advantage of it, maybe make a swing, and give us Jets fans something to talk about heading into preseason and the start of next year. Let me know what you're thinking for Winnipeg side of things. Are you foreseeing a big trade? Do you think the Jets are going to try and swing for like a Daniel Sprong? Drop your thoughts or comments below or at my social medias at @YourLivingLoco and at @LO_Winnipeg Jets. For tonight's episode, though, that's going to be all the time that we have. Thanks so much for making Locked On Jets your first listen of the day every day. We'll see you back here tomorrow with more Jets offseason coverage and perhaps some previews. But like I said, that's all the time that we have. Have a great night. And as always, go Jets, go.